You think you know the story. A poor boy, magic beans, and a beanstalk that grows into the clouds, with a giant waiting at the top. But what if I told you Jack and the Beanstalk is older than the Bible, older than the pyramids, older than writing itself? Because buried beneath this children's tale lies a secret, a story passed down by word of mouth for over 5,000 years, a tale of giants, of gods, and something far darker. Once you hear the truth behind Jack and the Beanstalk, you'll never see it the same way again. Welcome back, Darklings. Before we unearth the secrets of Jack and the Beanstalk, let's begin with the version you think you know. Once upon a time, in a small cottage on the edge of a village, there lived a widow and her only son, a boy named Jack. They were penniless, and with no food left to eat, the mother told Jack to take their last possession, their cow, and sell her at market. But on the way, Jack met a stranger. Instead of silver coins, the man offered Jack a handful of beans. Magic beans, he said. Jack, being young and foolish, took the deal. When he returned home, his mother was furious. She threw the beans out the window and sent Jack to bed without a bite to eat. But in the night, something grew. A great beanstalk burst from the earth, twisting, coiling, towering up into the clouds. Jack, curious and bold, began to climb. Higher and higher he went, until the ground below vanished in mist, and above he found a strange land. At the top he found a great stone castle. He knocked, and the door creaked open to reveal a towering woman, a giantess. "Go away," she warned him. "My husband is a giant, and he eats boys for breakfast." But seeing how hungry Jack was, she took pity on him. She brought him bread and cheese and a bowl of milk, and let him sit by the fire. And when her husband came home, his footsteps shaking the castle walls, she hid Jack in the oven. And then came the voice, "Fi Fo Fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." But the giant's wife stood firm. "There's no boy here," she said. And the giant, grumbling, ate his dinner, counted his gold into bags, and fell asleep by the fire. When the castle was silent, Jack crept out, stole a bag of gold, and climbed back down the beanstalk. For a while Jack and his mother lived happily, but some time later Jack climbed the beanstalk again, and once more the giant's wife fed him and warmed him by the fire, and once more she hid him when the giant returned. This time Jack saw a hen that laid golden eggs. He waited for the giant to sleep, then took the hen and escaped down the stalk. And still he wasn't finished. On the third climb, Jack stole a golden harp, a harp that sang on its own with a voice like wind through silver bells. But as he ran, the harp cried out, "Help, master! A boy is stealing me!" The giant awoke and gave chase. Jack scrambled down the beanstalk, the golden harp wailing in his arms, its notes rising like a siren's cry. Above him, the clouds groaned. The giant was coming, each step shaking the sky. As Jack reached the ground, he shouted for his mother, "Bring the axe!" She came running, axe in hand, and Jack began to chop. The stalk shuddered, split. The giant was already halfway down, thundering closer with every heartbeat. Jack swung again and again. With one final blow, the beanstalk cracked, splintered, and tore free. The giant fell, down through the clouds, down through the sky, down into the earth with a roar that echoed for miles. He was killed instantly, crushed beneath the weight of his own fall. Jack and his mother lived happily ever after. Or so the story goes. The tale you've just heard, the one about magic beans, the beanstalk, and the golden treasures, is closest to the version written down by folklorist Joseph Jacobs in 1890. But Jack's story doesn't start there. In fact, by the time it reached the page, it was already very old indeed. The earliest version we know of in print is a parody. In 1734, a small printed booklet called Jack Spriggins and the Enchanted Bean was published in London, openly mocking the tale. It treated Jack as a ridiculous figure, scoffing at the idea of beans growing into the sky and laughing at the very notion of castles in the clouds. But here's the thing. You can't parody something unless your audience already knows it, which means that even in the 1730s, Jack and the Beanstalk must have been so well known, so familiar, that it could be joked about in public print. And just a few decades later, in 1807, a more traditional version appeared, The History of Jack and the Beanstalk, published by Benjamin Tarbot. But in Tarbot's hands, the story changed. Jack wasn't just a poor boy anymore. He was a righteous avenger. A fairy tells him the giant murdered his father and stole his wealth. Suddenly, Jack's not stealing. He's restoring justice. It was a very Victorian move, taking a mischievous, chaotic character and reshaping him into a proper moral hero, someone who steals not out of greed but justice, who kills the giant not for gold but for revenge. In other words, they gave Jack a moral makeover. But earlier storytellers weren't so worried about morals. The version most people know today comes from Joseph Jacobs, a folklorist and serious collector of oral tales from across England. In 1890, he published Jack and the Beanstalk in his English fairy tales collection, based on a version he'd heard told by a Mrs. Hunt. Jacobs' version is widely believed to reflect the tale as it was told for generations, long before it ever made its way into print. And in that older, purer telling, there's no fairy, no revenge, no noble backstory, just Jack, not necessarily good, but always using cunning and luck to get away with it. He's a classic trickster, the kind of folk hero who doesn't fight with swords but with cleverness. And then there's that strange chant of the giant, Fi Fo Fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. We all know the line, but few realise just how old it is. It appears in Shakespeare's King Lear, written around 1605, and even then, Shakespeare was quoting something already considered ancient. Writers of the time described it as an old folk rhyme, a line spoken by ogres and giants in traditional oral storytelling. So where did it come from? Some say it's just nonsense. Strange syllables meant to frighten children, or mimic the sound of a lumbering giant. But in the 19th century, a Scottish antiquarian named Charles Mackay suggested something stranger. He believed the chant might come from Old Gaelic, and according to him, the words roughly translate to, "Behold, food, good to eat, enough to satisfy my hunger." In other words, not just a chant, but a giant's hunting call. There's no shortage of giants in world mythology. In the Bible, young David slays the towering Goliath with nothing but a sling and a stone. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus blinds the Cyclops Polyphemus, a one-eyed giant who devours men and lives in a mountain cave. In Norse myth, the gods themselves are locked in an eternal struggle with the Jotnar, ancient giants who came before the world of men. They are old, powerful, often the first inhabitants of the land, and perhaps that's the point. Some folklorists began to wonder, what if the giant in this story wasn't just a monster? What if he was a memory, a folk echo of a race or tribe of people that once existed and was defeated, demonized, turned into giants in the stories told by those who came after? And Jack? Jack might not be a hero at all. He climbs into a world that isn't his, steals its treasure, and kills its guardian, a colonizer, in a fairy tale, someone who invades, takes what he wants, and destroys what was there before. It sounds far-fetched, like folklore stretching too far. But then, something extraordinary was discovered. In 2016, researchers found evidence that Jack and the Beanstalk is much older than anyone ever imagined. Folklorists call it ATU 328, part of a system used to group together stories from around the world that follow the same plot pattern. Its official title, The Boy Who Stole the Ogre's Treasure. And here's where it gets strange. Versions of this story appear not just in England, but in places as far apart as Italy, Scandinavia, India, and beyond. Each one with the same core ingredients: a poor child, a monstrous guardian, and a daring theft from a world beyond the ordinary. The researchers analysed these stories using a method normally used to trace evolution, like a family tree for folklore, and what they found was astonishing. Jack's tale goes back over 5,000 years. A tale told long before the Bible, before the pyramids, before writing, a story passed via word of mouth across generations, carried through migrations, wars, and centuries, and somehow, impossibly, it survived. And according to those researchers, the tale most likely began among the Proto-Indo-Europeans, a prehistoric people who lived on the vast steppes between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea in what is now Ukraine, southern Russia, and western Kazakhstan. They were herders, wanderers, storytellers, and the language they spoke would one day evolve into Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, Norse, Celtic, and so many more. But beyond their language, we know very little. They left no temples, no written records, no great cities carved in stone. They lived during the late Stone Age into the early Bronze Age, around 4,500 to 2,500 BCE, and were semi-nomadic, following their herds across the wide, wind-swept grasslands. What they did leave behind were burial mounds, called kurgans, where the dead were laid to rest with grave goods, pottery, ornaments, and weapons of status, and that's almost all we have to prove they ever existed. And that is what makes Jack and the Beanstalk so astonishing. It may be one of the last living bridges to that forgotten people, a whisper from a vanished world, still echoing 5,000 years on. Jack's tale may be over 5,000 years old, but he wasn't alone. Stories like his appear again and again throughout ancient myth: a young outsider, a hidden or forbidden realm, a powerful guardian, and something magical, stolen. This pattern is so ancient and so widespread that folklorists have a name for it: the cultural hero motif. It's the idea of a daring figure who enters a sacred or dangerous realm, takes something powerful, and brings it back to humanity, and in doing so, explains how civilization itself began. And perhaps the clearest ancient parallel to Jack is Prometheus. In Greek myth, Prometheus is a titan who defies the gods. He climbs to the heavens, steals fire, the divine spark of knowledge, warmth, and civilization, and gives it to humanity. He's punished, of course, chained to a rock, his liver torn out day after day, but he becomes a symbol, a trickster hero, a cultural thief, someone who dares to cross the line between mortals and the divine. Just like Jack, he climbs a beanstalk into a sky realm guarded by a giant, and he returns with magical treasures: a hen that lays golden eggs, a singing harp, gifts that bring prosperity and enchantment to the world below. We see this pattern echo elsewhere too. In Norse mythology, Odin sneaks into the land of the giants and steals the sacred mead of poetry, a magical drink that bestows the gift of wisdom and storytelling upon the world. In the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, the hero enters a forbidden forest, defeats the guardian Humbaba, and claims the sacred cedar wood, divine material meant only for the gods and symbolic of civilization itself. Each of these figures defies guardians, takes something powerful, crosses into a realm not meant for mortals, and brings back a gift that changes the human world forever, just like Jack. Even the setting of Jack's adventure, the castle in the clouds, feels strangely familiar. In Greek myth, the gods live on Mount Olympus, hidden in the mist. In Norse cosmology, there's Asgard, a realm above the earth, connected to our world by a rainbow bridge. And in many cultures, there's the image of a great tree, the world tree, or axis mundi, a vertical structure linking the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. And what does Jack climb? A vine, a stalk, a living, twisting tower that reaches into the sky overnight, a gateway between worlds. So yes, it's a fairy tale, but it's also something else, a mythic echo, one that stretches all the way back to the ancient world. But what if Jack didn't just climb into another world? What if Jack died in the night? It's not as strange as it sounds, because in the ancient world, beans were no ordinary food. In Greek tradition, particularly among the Pythagoreans, beans were sacred and feared. They believed that beans contained the souls of the dead. Their sprouting roots were said to resemble tiny human embryos, as if little spirits were growing in the soil. Even the gas they caused was thought to be ghostly breath, evidence of spirits leaving the body. And strangest of all, the Pythagoreans believed the bean plant itself was a bridge, a living link between the realm of the living and the land of the dead. So when Jack trades his family's last cow, a source of milk, food, and life, for a handful of beans, he isn't just making a foolish bargain, he's trading life for death. A beanstalk grows towering into the sky, and Jack climbs it. But in many ancient belief systems, the afterlife isn't down below, it's above. In Maya cosmology, the Milky Way was known as the World Tree. Souls were thought to pass through it on their way to the next world. To die was to climb. In Norse mythology, the great tree Yggdrasil connected the worlds of the living, the dead, and the gods. In Hindu cosmology, there's the Ashvatha, a sacred tree with its roots in heaven and its branches reaching downward to earth. And in Siberian and Mongolian shamanic rites, the soul ascends, climbing a sacred pole or tree to reach the spirit world. Jack's beanstalk fits perfectly, a sudden supernatural vine reaching beyond life into the realm of the otherworld. And what does he find at the top? A giant guarding a strange domain. A golden harp that sings, a hen that lays golden eggs, an endless source of sustenance, and in some versions a bag of gold that never runs out. But these aren't just magical curiosities. They're symbols, music, sustenance, immortality, not mere riches, but the rewards of the soul. And the giant? Perhaps he's not a villain at all. Perhaps he's the guardian of the dead, like Hades or Yama or the many shadowy figures in myth who protect the gates of the otherworld. Jack steals from him, he flees, he climbs back down, and then he cuts the beanstalk. He severs the bridge between the living and the dead. The journey is over. So what kind of story is this? It may look like a fairy tale, but it walks and talks like something far older, a ritual journey, a mythic passage, a soul's climb into the afterlife, and its return. It belongs to a family of myths stretching back thousands of years, stories like Inanna descending into the Sumerian underworld, or Orpheus crossing into Hades to retrieve Eurydice, Dumuzi, the god who dies with the seasons and rises again. Jack climbs, he faces the guardian, he brings back something magical, and he survives. So maybe Jack didn't rob a giant. Maybe he found what waits for all of us at the end of the climb. And if that unsettled you, wait until you hear what happened in Hamlin. Click to watch the chilling true story behind the Pied Piper, if you dare. See you in a future video.